Thank you. I rise tonight to speak about a Labor government in crisis, a Transport Minister who spent 12 months failing to make decisions suddenly makes one in the national interest. There's been more than 125 days since she announced the 90-day infrastructure review, and we haven't seen hide nor hair of that since it was announced. It's even been criticised by state Labor governments in my home state of Victoria. And meanwhile, billions of dollars worth of projects sit waiting for a decision are at risk from Labor's Razor Gang. The Infrastructure Australia bill has seemingly disappeared from the Senate red, despite being brought into the Senate on the 13th of June. 3 months later, we're still yet to continue that debate as the Labor Party scrambles for legislation for us to debate in this chamber this week. But tonight I want to talk about one decision that the Transport Minister, Minister King, has made. The decision to block the proposed Qatar Airways from doubling its single daily service to Australia's major airports. Though it's left everyone in the aviation industry, major airlines and even state Labor leaders scratching their heads. The one company not scratching their heads as to why is Qantas. After 7 weeks of media attention and parliamentary scrutiny, the only airline that seems to have made approaches to governments against the proposal is Qantas. Since the decision was made, which has only been clarified by the Prime Minister today as being on the July 10th, every other major airline, former chairs of the ACCC, several state Labor governments, Australian airports, customers, business leaders, economists, major tourism operators have all called on this Labor government to review or reverse this decision. Australians are suffering from a cost of living crisis that's only been exacerbated by the Albanese Labor government. Airfares are currently 50% higher than before the global pandemic just 3 years ago. International seat capacity is 25% lower than at the same point in time. So at a time when we need to boost our capacity and competition to get Australian travellers on their way and bring tourists back, what does this government do? It rejects the offer of more flights, more seats and cheaper airfares. Labor sits over there on the government benches today and the minister herself says, and I quote, "I know that Australians are paying too much for their domestic tickets. More international flights from Qatar would not have helped that." Labor Transport Minister admits that airfares are too high, but says more competition won't actually drive down prices. Well, I'm sorry, Minister. It's Economics 101. More competition does put downward pressure on prices. This minister is either out of her depth, but she's definitely out of touch. Whether it's domestic or international airfares, Australians are paying more. Having a thriving international aviation market with more customer choice, more destinations, more connections to wherever Australians who love to travel want to go has to be a good thing for Australians, their decision-making, our economy and the price of airfares. Virgin Australia's CEO says Qatar's additional capacity could have brought down prices on key European routes by up to 40%. That's thousands of dollars in some cases. Virgin is a key partner of Qatar Airways and carries passengers in the domestic market to connect with the latter's international flights. The Coalition wants to see an affordable, reliable and safe aviation industry where our domestic airlines are prosperous and continue to employ tens of thousands of Australians right across our country in well-paying, secure jobs. But what we're seeing at the moment is things are getting worse, not better. The Qatar proposal was to increase passenger and freight capacity by a further 28 flights per week, doubling their existing capacity, or in simple terms, one extra flight per day into Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. And former ACCC Chairman Rob Sims said if there was ever a time to allow new entrants in, then this is it. The Prime Minister and Minister King claim to be protecting the market, but the executives of every major airline except Qantas support a review of the decision. Rex Airlines Deputy Chairman John Sharp has said the decision should be reversed, and I quote, "I think it's appropriate that they reverse the decision on Qatar flights," noting that they repatriated more Australians stranded overseas during the COVID pandemic than Qantas did. Australians in need were actually served by the airline applying for one additional flight out of 4 capital cities a week. And I just want to pick up on that point because it is important. Qatar Airways kept flying to Australia, repatriating stranded Australians from right across the country during the pandemic when our own airlines were shut down or unable to assist. Australians are known to be the country that helps out a mate when they are in strife, and in this case, Qatar kept Australia's aviation border open, sometimes flying huge planes at great cost with just 20 people on board. But what those passengers didn't see were the huge volumes of goods, our great exports, right under their feet. WA Labor Premier Roger Cook reflected on that this week when he said Qatar Airways kept running during COVID, bringing home Western Australians and keeping our freight moving. My government has been clear that we want more routes connecting to Perth and the cultural and economic benefits those flights bring. It's not just the coalition that thinks this decision needs to be reversed and reviewed. It's actually Labor state premiers who are calling on this government, who are not being heard by their own Prime Minister and their own Minister. He understands that in a time of crisis we could have actually needed Qatar. The Labor South Australian government has also said, "We appreciate Qatar Airways' commitment to South Australia since it started to flying in Adelaide in 2016, in particular during COVID, when they played a unique and vital role in repatriating South Australians and transporting tonnes of cargo to maintain supply chains for South Australian agricultural exporters." That was Premier Malinauskas. And the acting Labor Premier of Queensland, Stephen Miles, said, "If it was up to us, they would have been approved." And don't forget the former Treasurer and the current Treasurer's mentor and former boss, Wayne Swan, when he says an appropriate review where all things are given, all these revelations would be good. Because what has stunk about this government's decision is the cover-up. They have been unable to come clean with the real reason they made the decision. They couldn't even come clean until today on the time they made the decision. And what was the involvement by the Prime Minister, the Treasurer's office, Minister King and the Trade Minister's office, and indeed the Foreign Affairs Minister's office, given the 7 different reasons this government and its ministers have chosen to give the Australian public on why they would not approve Qatar Airways' application? I join Graham Turner, the CEO of the tourism industry, Flight Centre, that this is a significant blow. No other part of the tourism and aviation sector can rationalise it. Well, I join him. Minister King has given 7 different excuses, from decarbonising the aviation sector, its new fleet, to the latest form of words in the national interest. And you heard today in question time, when asked to articulate what the national interest included, the Labor Party ministers, one after the other, were unable to do that. Well, we've asked you and your colleagues to explain to the Australian people what it means, and so far we've got no answers from this government that is committed to keep this decision shrouded in secrecy. For what purpose? One can only ask. The government can't shy away from it, not after today. And today, the coalition, the Liberal and National parties, with the support of the crossbench, not the Greens, not the Labor Party, but individual senators from right across this country, has successfully established a select committee into the issue, and we will get the answers. Prime Minister, I just want to remind you of what you said at the election. When you make a mistake, you were going to confess. You were going to admit to it. You were going to set about correcting the mistake. You said you wouldn't blame anyone else. You'd actually accept responsibility. That's what leaders do. I couldn't agree more, Prime Minister. I could not agree more, and it is time for you now to fess up, to take responsibility, and to make sure the department gives truthful answers to the Senate inquiry.